Hello, I'm Hilary Rose, and this is another episode of the Live Wild podcast. Today, I'm honoured to talk to Pat Divilly. He's a breathwork coach, facilitator, #1 bestselling author of Fit Mind, and shadow worker. We track his journey from being the fitness guy through to his emotional work, breathwork, and trauma work, and how his picture of health has expanded over the years. He helps people overcome their negative life patterns and empower themselves.
If you think about all the times in your life when you have these little stresses, where maybe your boss shouts at you or your partner gives you a funny look, and your body's responding all the time with kind of that energy. And so in theory, a healthy system is going to have that surge of energy, and then you're going to dislodge the energy in some way and use it so that you come back into homeostasis, you come back into balance. But for a lot of us, we have that surge of energy and there's nowhere for it to go because, again, we're appropriate and we hold it together. And so it just sits there in the system. And then I'm in a wound up system. It's a bit like a soldier coming back from 6 months of war.
Yeah.
The body's been in hypervigilance, and now they go and they sit with their family, and their family are safe in theory, but it doesn't feel safe because their system is just perceiving threats everywhere because it's never come to completion. So somatic work is about bringing some of those those interrupted cycles to completion.
So, if you're on the journey of self-discovery, either at the beginning of it, or you're in the thick of it, or you haven't started at all, then maybe this chat is for you. Healing journeys can be both ecstatic and tough, but it's great to meet like-minded people, and for me, Pat was one of those. And above all, we're able to have the crack about it. So, I hope you enjoy the show. Pat Divilly is here. He's here on the Live Wild podcast. Pat, thank you for joining me this morning. Pat is a breathwork coach, facilitator, and #1 best-selling author of Fit Mind, and also shadow worker. Loving that title. We're going to have to dive into that a little bit later on. Pat, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to get to chat. And yeah, the shadow worker thing catches people, so it'd be good to chat on that.
Yeah, I like it. You started, I would only say your journey, because your journey starts when you're born, but you started your fitness journey, not your fitness journey, your career journey as a fitness entrepreneur. Talk me through that a little bit.
I was very insecure growing up. I always believed that like the first couple of years of our life form the blueprint for kind of how we see ourselves and how we see ourselves fitting in. And my family moved around a lot. So different schools, different houses, a lot of bullying. And I would say I developed a narrative that I'm the new guy, or I'm the outsider, or I don't quite fit in anywhere. And that brought me a lot of insecurity. And when I was a teenager, the first thing that gave me a sense of confidence was I started martial arts and I started weight training. And so from the day I set foot in the gym, which was when I was 14, I said, I'm going to own this gym someday. And I was adamant that that was going to be my career path. But back then, which is 20 years ago now, fitness wasn't a thing in Ireland the way it is in recent years. There was no Instagram, of course. I always say there was two people. There was probably Carl Henry from Operation Transformation, and there was Paul Byrne, who used to train Boyzone and all the celebrities. So I was adamant I'm going to be a fitness guy, and everyone around me said, you need to get a real job. That's not going to happen. And ultimately failed with my first business when I came out of college. And then I started again, and I started teaching classes rather than one-to-one sessions. And that awoke me to the power of community. Like I was a douchey 21-year-old personal trainer, standard kind of stand next to the client in the gym.
Be kind to yourself.
Okay, I was an archetypical, stand next to the client, tell them about sit-ups and broccoli and count their reps. I was a professional rep counter when I was in Dublin. And then when I failed with a business, I had a lot of shame, and I'm quite sensitive. I've always been sensitive, and I shamed myself for that for a long time, but that was my superpower. But when I failed, I had such shame, and I just really hated myself, and was lost for a while. And when I started teaching fitness again, it was like, okay, my clients are probably struggling with their own self-esteem the same way I do. So this is not really about push-ups and broccoli. It's about a safe space for people to I didn't have the language for that, but got into fitness, did the fitness thing for a couple of years, and working with a lot of people, I started seeing it's not really about the fitness or the food. It's about how people are speaking to themselves, and it's about how they're dealing with stress, and it's about their sleep. And my picture of health just started to expand. And I then did a couple of years in coaching and kind of more cognitive based work. And then I moved into more emotional based work because I recognized that it's easy to question your thoughts and think positive when you emotionally feel grounded, but when you feel destabilized, that's when your mind starts lying to you. So that brought me into breath work and meditation and trauma work. And I guess the long and the short is over 15 years, my picture of what health has expanded from my own struggles and from the struggles I've seen in people I work with. And now I look at emotional, mental, and relational health and try to help people better understand themselves and their patterns. I think we're all living out patterns, and we're living inside of a story that we're not aware of. And so I try to help people understand the story that they're living in, so that they can take back the pen, if you will.
Wow. Because, going from the work as the fitness guy to, we'll say, the shadow worker, for want of a different term for the moment, that might seem like quite a leap to some people. But actually, when you speak it through like that, it feels like just an evolution, just a curvy evolution of what you've been doing. And the work is deeper and deeper.
Yeah. I guess it's almost like, when you get what you thought you wanted, we're all driven to the work for different reasons. It's like some people are driven to the work because they're inspired. Other people are driven to the work because they're desperate. Other people are driven to the work because they have a midlife crisis. Other people are driven to the work because they achieve everything they wanted and they recognize that wasn't it.
Wow.
So we're all brought to, if we choose to like step into this stuff, it's like, there's a reason you get to it. And my reason for getting to it was, the other side of the fitness thing was when I achieved everything I wanted in fitness. Like, I bought a house and a car and I had a successful business, and the insecure little boy now had people that followed him and all this kind of stuff. And it was like, none of it fulfilled me. So then you have to start questioning, like, okay, I've tried everything outside of myself. Like, what's actually happening inside of myself? So, yeah.
Wow. I love that. I'm always interested to know what motivates people. I suppose as an actor, I've broken that down time and time again. When I approach characters, I have to approach them as like, well, what motivates this character? Who is this character? Like, I've kind of had a similar thing going on with you, but I've approached it slightly but I've approached it slightly differently, in the sense that I first came to all this work looking at characters and what motivates them. What would you say motivates you then and now?
One of the frames I use is to talk about wounding or worth. And so I'll say that we can be driven by either wounding or by worth. And so to be driven by wounding is the sense that there's something inherently wrong or flawed with me. But if I do all these things, it's going to cover up that wound and it's going to make me feel like I'm enough. So I would say I was driven by wounding a lot in my 20s. Like, I'm broken, I'm bad, I'm flawed, I'm going to get found out. But if I achieve all these things and I cover up all my messiness, then, I'll be enough. So that was my wounding story. And that's exhausting, of course, because you're constantly hiding. I'm driven now by curiosity, I would say. Like, I'm curious about why I do what I do and how I might do something different. I used to beat myself up for my mistakes or for my patterns or for my addictions or for any of those things. And now there's more of a curiosity around, I wonder where that came from. And I wonder, I'm big on parts work, the idea that we have all these different parts within us, and curious about like who's showing up in any given moment. So as I chat to you here, I can be the 36-year-old grounded man, or I could be an insecure teenager who wants to impress you. And it's like, I'm going to show up as the man. That motivates me, just curiosity and adventure and listening to life. I talk about that sometimes, that, a lot of us have demands on life as to what life should give us, but I try to come at it from a perspective of what can I bring to life. Like, I'm always getting invitations into different things. My ego might not want to follow that calling, but I have to trust that there's something bigger happening, if that makes sense.
You talked about success, and having it all, essentially having the house and the car and the successful business. How has your picture of success changed over the years?
I was driving around yesterday, and I don't know why this popped into my head, but I started thinking about people that never come to the work, and never and seem happy and are happy, I'm sure. And I was like, okay, maybe happiness is the only thing that matters when it comes to success. But then I thought, can you be happy without contributing and without pursuing growth? My definition of success now is being authentic and having peace within myself. So I was a nice guy, I would say, in my 20s, and a nice guy is someone who tells you what you want to hear, and in a subtle way is manipulative. Like, nice guys, nice girls, we were all trained to like be good boys and good girls and be what's the word, be appropriate and all this kind of stuff. And so
people pleasers as well.
Exactly, yeah. Like, I was terrified of upsetting anyone, of pissing people off. And it was interesting because I came out and I did the social media thing in the 23, 24. I started doing social media, and you start getting approval for like putting out a certain image of yourself, and unconsciously then you're like, oh, I better better do more of the same. So now I want to be authentic. I'm not so concerned with being nice, because nice people aren't authentic. They tell you what they want to hear. They manipulate you in subtle ways. They're not trustworthy. They're not solid. They're not reliable. So it's not that I want to be an asshole, but I want to be honest, you know. So success to me is being authentic, you know, and saying what I need to say, pursuing what I need to pursue, being honest with myself, being honest with other people, being pulled by my heart rather than my head. And that's success to me now, I think, is willingness to have a heart-led life, maybe.
Oh, I really like that. Okay, so what would you then, like, I don't see failures as failures, but what would you say has been your biggest failure? Like, I always see them as learning curves.
Yeah.
But again, it's subjective, and it's like, if you're in the work doing that, I think you can be kinder to yourself and say, okay, fuck that one up, but I'm learning. But from the outside looking in, or from maybe a parental viewpoint, it's easy to turn around and say, you know, if you've got that parent voice in your head, it's easy to say, well, I'm a failure. What do you think has been your biggest quote unquote failures?
What comes to me when you mention that is like around, because I think it can be a cop out for me sometimes to say, oh, there's no failures. There's a part of me that believes that, like, there's no failures and I'm learning all the time, but sometimes I don't learn. I just keep repeating the same thing again and again. So that's my question. But what comes to me is, like, we all have an inner parent. Like, so we've got the inner child that's a bit vulnerable and scared and insecure and whatever it might be. We've an inner teenager who's angry at the world, maybe, or whatever it is. But then we've inner parents that I think of it as kind of masculine, you know, an inner father and an inner mother, and they've kind of got slightly different energies. Maybe the inner mother is a bit more nurturing, and maybe the inner father is a bit more strict. And I almost think of, when it comes to like failure, it's like those two voices. Maybe the inner mother part of me can say, oh, you know, just try again. You can learn from this and stuff like that. Whereas there's a bit more of a strictness to the inner father, not in a bad way, but it's like a healthy parent wants the best for you, and it's not always going to be like what you want to hear, but as long as it comes from a place of love. So anyway, to your question, my biggest failures, again, I couldn't change it, and again, it's probably a learning lesson. But when I look back at my 20s, I achieved a lot, and I didn't enjoy a lot of the highlight moments because I couldn't let myself relax into it and be present to what was happening. So I won entrepreneurial awards, and I did the Late Late Show, and all these things that I thought would be wow. And it's like, I don't think I could be present, and maybe my failure was not being able to slow down and smell the roses or the coffee or whatever it was.
Yeah, that resonates with me, because even sometimes, like, my failure, I would say a repeated thing for me is like, when I can't be present with my kids, that's a big thing for me. That's repeated, and I feel like I'm learning that all the time. And then I kind of beat myself up in the middle of it, and I go, why can't I just be present? Why can't I just be present with, you know, sit and color with them, and, you know, without thinking all the next things. So it's interesting to, you know, I mean, I've had much bigger failures than that, you know, career wise and all that kind of stuff. But it's, when I come back to it every time, it's like my only failure that I keep repeating and keep beating myself up over is that one. It's just presence. Presence. And I'm trying not to beat myself up. It's like meditation when the mind wanders. You know, it's like, don't beat yourself up for that. And I'd always say that because I meditate quite a bit. I'm not going to beat myself up for like my mind wandering. I'm just going to gently bring it back. So that's what I have to continue to do in that work as well. Is like, okay, my mind has gone elsewhere, thinking I should be doing other things. And it's like, no, just going to bring myself back to that.
I think a potentially interesting piece to do with something like that would be that, you know, something, when presence disappears, something else comes online. So it could be like my fear comes online, or my boredom, or my expectation, or whatever it is. And almost to give that part of you a voice or a persona that, okay, that's my overachiever. Like, this mode of mine is my overachiever, that when I feel insecure, when I feel nervous, when I feel I'm not enough, my overachiever runs to the front of the queue and says, I got this, like, we know how to do this. And that part of me takes over, and then I lose my presence. So it could be interesting to kind of, because then you can take a breath and you can say, okay, overachiever, we're going to be okay here. Like, I appreciate what you're trying to do here, but this is not needed right now. I'm playing with my kids. I don't need to, you know, change the world right now.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's so interesting, actually, because I watched, have you seen the animated film Inside Out?
Everyone tells me about it, and I've not seen it. No.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And so Inside Out 2 came out, and we went to see it last night in the cinema. And it's I was sitting there having almost like an existential crisis, looking at all these things, just going, oh my God, this is how it functions. And this is how I functioned as a child and then as a teenager. And it's wonderful. It's so interesting. I'm sure I'm pretty positive they had a rake of psychologists on their script writing endeavors. But it's brilliant. It's really, really brilliant. So it talks about the different parts and trying to integrate them all and go, well, I'll take over when this is happening. And, don't worry, we got the rest.
Yeah.
I feel like, so it's interesting, right? I went, recently, because Young Offenders season 4 came out recently. So I had thousands, more new people come to the page, and I put up this little video, and it's like 5 things you may not know about me. And the 5th one, I was kind of going, will I say this or not? But I said it. I said, okay, back at the end of 2019, I had a spiritual awakening. So that, and I didn't talk much more about it. But I had the most interest about that, people wanting to know and messaging and say, can you talk further about it? So I will do it at some point. But what I find really interesting is that when you've had a spiritual awakening, you can spot it in other people a mile off. And I feel like you've had one, whether you want to talk about it or not, or whether you're using a slightly different language than spiritual awakening. Would I be somewhere close to that?
Yeah, I probably always have a resistance to awakening as a word. I'm not sure how to. I always wondered about awakening. For me, awakening always had this. I always thought of like Eckhart Tolle or someone who's like just clicked the button and now they're at one all the time. I've had many moments of waking up and like falling back asleep, I would say.
Yeah.
But I don't know when that first happened. I look at my younger years, and I guess I was very sensitive, so I could kind of always tell. I didn't realize it at the time, but I could always tell what's going on. If I'm in a group, I struggle with groups, because if I'm in a group of people, still to this day, I can speak in front of 1,000 people comfortably on stage because I know my role. I can do one-to-one quite comfortably, but if I'm in a group of 5 or 6 people, I find that quite challenging, because I can kind of sense that, okay, he's bullshitting. Okay, she's not feeling comfortable. So I think there's always been that sensitivity, but a lot of sensitive people, we learn how to shut it down because it's hard to be sensitive. So I drank a lot when I was in my 20s, and I found a million other ways to distract myself. So, I would say I wake up a lot and I fall back asleep, but I don't know the specific moments where. There's probably been different moments. There's probably been stuff that's brought me to my knees. Like I was close to suicidal when I was 24, when I failed with my business. And that was kind of like when everything gets stripped away and you feel like you're nothing, then it's like, okay, well,
what am I?
Yeah, there's something still here. There's a part of me choosing to still be here despite how bad things are. So, and plant medicine work over the years has woken me up at times and sent me back I put myself back to sleep. So yeah, I never know how to answer that question, but I'm definitely a seeker, and I'm definitely aware that I'm a lot more than just, the collection of ideas that I've come to about myself. It's my mission in life is to allow myself to figure out who I am beyond who I think I am. That's my kind of where I'm trying to go.
You talked about plant medicine a little bit, and I've seen you talk about it in other interviews as well. What was the draw for you to go down the plant medicine road? Because it's and I've been down that road as well, and I found it, amazingly beneficial in many ways, and it kind of fast tracks awakening and healing a little bit. But I think it's the integration on the other side is where things can go wrong. How did you feel the call to plant medicine in the first instance?
I had heard a lot about ayahuasca for years. And then I think I first heard when I was maybe 24. And I always thought, I'll come to that at some stage. And I promised myself I'd do a Vipassana 10-day silent retreat before I went to medicine, but I didn't end up doing that. But it was knocking on my door, and I was having a hard time for a couple of years, and I felt like it would be supportive, but it just never came around. And then I was in America with Aubrey Marcus, who's like, I'm
aware of him. Yeah.
So we were out there and with a group, and they're all talking about ayahuasca and all this stuff. So I came back and I thought, all right, I'm going to do it now. And I signed up, and I was in a really good place. And it was like the first time in years I felt like I didn't actually need it, but now was the time. So I went and did it. And I turned up and I thought it was ayahuasca. It was actually wachuma, which is the cactus.
San Pedro, yeah.
Yeah, and I turned up and I just come back from America with all these, hippies or whatever, not hippies, but like spiritual people. And the shaman was like, "What's your intention?" And I said, "Oh, I just want to become one with the universe." And he looked at me. She's like, "Shut the fuck up." She's like, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "I think I have some grief," So
Yeah.
and yeah, I sat with Wachuman over the next couple of years. I maybe went to 8 Wachuma ceremonies, couple of ayahuasca ceremonies, and it was very supportive. It opened me up. It reconnected me to my body. It showed me one of the most powerful experiences. What I sometimes tell was that I went down and my first couple of ceremonies were nice. It was like someone once told me, and I don't know if it's true, like this probably colored my vision of it, but they said ayahuasca is a bit like your grandmother grabbing you by the scruff of the throat and shaking you and saying, sort your shit out. Yeah. And then Wachuma is more like your grandfather putting his arm around you and saying, look how beautiful the world is. And that was my experience for the first few. But then I went to a ceremony and I felt the grief come in and I was like, oh, this is heavy. Like it felt like I was dropping into a well that was never going to, and I wailed and I wailed and I wailed for hours. And the shaman came and held my head and I was having memories from childhood. And then she gave me her finger and I held it like a baby would hold. And then I had memories. And then I felt myself as a baby looking into my dad's eyes when he was holding me in his arms. Like it was wild. And the grief was around how lonely I had felt throughout my life, despite, again, achievements or like being in, like from the, like I've seen a movie of my life and all these beautiful moments, but it was like, but I always felt alone. So that was powerful. And then a year later, I went back and I was doing another ceremony and the same thing came. So the grief was coming. And I saw out of the corner of my eye, the shaman walking toward me. And a part of me thought, oh, she's going to rub my head and she's going to look after me again. And she came and she sat with me and I'm crying and I'm crying and crying. And she looked at me and goes, when are you going to stop being a victim? I was just like, oh shit.
Oh, wow.
It just completely broke, my pattern. I just stopped and I looked outside. Yeah, I looked outside and there's a fire and people are dancing around the fire and everyone's kind of in joy and I'm just like swimming and like allow myself to stay in grief. And she said, who benefits when you're a victim? And I was trying to come up with all these answers to like justify me playing the victim. And I said, well, I'm a speaker. And I said, I'm a podcaster and I write books. And I said, if I come out and if I've got my shit together and I'm like perfect and I've sorted it all out, then like, that's not very relatable. People tell me I'm relatable. I want to be relatable. And she said to me, oh, so the victim in you enables and keeps the victim in your audience alive. And I was just like, oh shit. Yeah. And I remember I had a big talk for 1,000 people in Dublin. It was the biggest one I had done of my own workshops a couple of weeks later. And I remember making a commitment to myself that, okay, the man needs to show up here, not the little boy that's scared. And I can't need anything from the audience. I can't, because if I show up and I'm trying to impress, then I'm trying to take from them. Whereas if I show up from a grounded, like secure place, then I'm actually bringing something. So that was powerful. So yeah, plant medicine was definitely a roller coaster. Yeah, always a positive experience, I would say. But maybe similar to like we talked about failure earlier, things that other people might perceive as failure, like I don't know, making a mess of a talk or launching a program and nobody buying it. I would never see those things as failures. And similar, having a big emotional experience, I would never see as a bad experience. Like people talk about having a bad trip or having a bad. I think maybe it's more accurate to say it was a challenging trip than a bad trip, because it's just showing you more yourself, in my experience at least. Absolutely.
Yeah. There's been some journeys that I've been part of that have been like come out the other end gone, I'm very grateful, but that was heavy.
Yeah. And it's funny that I was at ayahuasca a couple of years ago, and Shipibo tradition, they'll
brilliant.
Yeah, beautiful. They'll, light the candle, and once it's pitch dark, everyone drinks the cup and you blow out the candle, and then you're in darkness and the Icaros come and they're singing these beautiful songs all night. And it felt like being transported into the jungle, many lifetimes and all this kind of stuff. And then at the end of the night, as they started to slow down, the shaman said, that's us done for the night. Would anyone else like to sing a song? And there's like silence in the room, just Irish people in the room, silence. And then after a few minutes, some guy in the corner, some guy from Cork, he's like, I have a joke. I was just like, this is the perfect blend of going into the other worlds and then coming back to the humanity of Or I've one of the shamans I'd speak to, I contacted her once and I said, I'm really struggling. Like, I'm completely lost. Like, what do I do? And I thought she'd give me some spiritual practice. She's like, get yourself to the pub and have a couple of pints of stout. And I was just like, okay.
Yeah.
Nice balance of not getting lost in that world either.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Because it can be all consuming, and it can, lead you down many, many rabbit holes.
Mm.
And there's always the intention as well, or not the intention, but there's always the default of like always searching for the light, because it's quite a blissful experience. Obviously, you go through all the dark parts, but then if it's managed correctly, and you end up with this beautiful, really blissful light experience. And then it's just like there can be the almost addiction, to chasing the light. And that leaves people, I think, very, very ungrounded,
Yeah, one of my teachers calls it dissociation in holy robes, like meditation practices sometimes, where it's like there's an obsession with going upward, ascending, and there's a resistance to descending. And they'll say, like, the baby grows in the dark, the seed is planted in the dark. So a lot happens in the dark, but this is where shadow work comes in. It's like, for someone to sit and meditate and deny their anger and we are all one and all this kind of stuff, it's nice and it's fluffy and everything else, but it's doing to yourself what was probably done to you in childhood. If you were told in childhood you're not supposed to experience certain emotions and you shame them, and then you go and meditate and try to out meditate your anger, it's like, no, you're a human being. You're not some spiritual. You are a spiritual. You're having you're spiritual having human, or human having a spirit, but you're not supposed. You don't need to be enlightened. I don't think. It's like you need to be human and authentic.
Let's talk about shadow working. Like, for those out there who are like, what the hell is that? Can you break it down, please?
Yeah. You come into the world and you've got like pure expression. So a little baby will cry when they want to cry. They'll laugh when they want to laugh. They'll typically shift between those states fairly quickly because there's no story attached to it. There's no like, as adults, we cry because our partner broke up with us and we just, I'm never going to meet someone again. And we get caught in all these stories, which keep us stuck in the emotion. Whereas a baby just cries and then it's okay, it's done. It's just an expression of energy, and then they laugh and then they dance and then they're naked. There's no shame. There's just a shamelessness. And then obviously we become socialized. So particularly, 4, 5, 6, 7, well, terrible twos actually. They talk about like,
yeah,
that's where, you think up to probably 2, we'll talk about ourselves in the third person, like Pat hungry, Pat tired, Pat. And then suddenly at 2 or 3, it's I.
Yes.
That creates separation. So now you're your own individual. And when you're your own individual, you have a sense of who you are. And when you have a sense of who you are, you create a sense of who you're not. So if you see yourself as a good person, you'll probably refuse the fact that you're potentially a bad person also. So the shadow is the parts of ourselves that we reject, deny, or abandon. So kind of obvious ones will be, boys being told boys don't cry. They'll typically push their grief and their sadness into shadow, and that's hidden away. If girls are told, being angry is not very ladylike, they push their anger into shadow. The challenge becomes these parts don't disappear. They take on a life of their own. So the person who says, I'm not an angry person, the anger is going somewhere. They're either projecting it toward themselves, or else they become someone who's passive aggressive or sarcastic, or someone gets caught in gossip and you lose the power. So anger is not a bad thing. Anger is where your assertiveness lives. Anger is where your boundaries live. Grief is not a bad thing. Grief is connected to love. You can only grieve what you've loved. And so if you shut down your grief, you shut down or numb yourself to love. So shadow work, in essence, is as a kid, you decided certain parts of yourself were acceptable and other parts were not, based on what society told you, based on, you received love when you showed your work ethic. You received criticism when you showed your laziness. And so you decided laziness was bad. You put it in the bad box. You locked it away. And now you fight with yourself when that shows up in your life, which it's supposed to show up in your life because it's probably a sign to rest or whatever it might be. Shadow work is taking these things out of the box and just having a closer look and saying, wait a second, is anger good or bad? No, anger's got context. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's bad. Sometimes it's appropriate. Sometimes it's not. So I talked earlier about the nice guy or the nice girl. Your inner critic will feed you stories and will berate you when you consider stepping outside of the nice girl role or the good girl role. So you were told to be a good girl, don't ask too much, don't get above your station. Anytime you try and do something beyond that, your inner critic's going to come in and say, who do you think you are? So it's your parents' voice in disguise. So shadow work is to challenge those voices, to take back the parts that you shut down, and just to allow yourself to be more of who you are, not to be appropriate, to be authentic.
Mm.
Yeah.
How does one approach that then when you talk about doing the shadow work, and you've laid it out beautifully there, but how does one actually approach that in their day-to-day lives?
There's many ways, I would say. One way of seeing, I mean, projection is an obvious one. Projections where it's not comfortable to see something in ourselves and we refuse to see something in ourselves. So the world has a brilliant way of putting the traits in front of us in the form of other people. So an example would be if you've denied your anger and you have a hard time speaking up for yourself, you will repeatedly meet people in your life who you think are taking advantage of you. You'll meet people who walk all over you, who don't take an interest in your needs, all that kind of stuff. And you can point the finger and say, I keep meeting these types of people, or I keep meeting partners who don't show up for me. And you can point the finger out there and look out there, or you can look at the three fingers pointing back at you and say, what part of me is choosing this? Because a part of you is choosing it. So that's one way is look at projection. So what do I project onto other people? What frustrates me or irritates me in other people oftentimes is a sign of what's in us. Another note is that it's not all murky and horrible stuff in the shadow. We've also got what's called the golden shadow. So the golden shadow is when you were told you were too much. So maybe you sang in front of your family when there was visitors around the house and they said, stop, go to your room, go to your room. And maybe in that moment you made the association that I'm not a performer. I don't have a good voice. And then you shut that part of yourself down. So oftentimes the people that inspire us in life also point to our shadow. So you think about the tens of thousands of people that go to see Ed Sheeran play and project onto him that he's a creative genius and he's an amazing talent and all this kind of stuff. A lot of those people have denied those aspects of themselves. And so they project it onto someone else. So if you look at your heroes and you look at the people you judge, these can point to disowned parts of yourself. Another way of seeing your shadow is noticing where your reactivity is. So, or, you know, if someone compliments you and you feel the need to shut that down really quickly, it's probably a sign of shadow being touched. Like you're afraid to be in your power. There's a false humility there. You can also see your shadow in the cycles that keep playing out in your life. So, you know, you mentioned earlier, say struggling to be present with your kids. If that was a common theme in your life of struggling to be present in the magic moments, it could be like, okay, there's a bit of shadow at play here. What's the shadow? And it could be that there's fear in the shadow, like a fear of what happens when I fully show up as myself.
Yeah.
So those are some ways. Addictions also, like what you think about, okay, when I drink too much, what part of me is showing up that I'm not comfortable with, that I'm trying to get away from? So it could be my boredom, it could be any number of things, but it's about being curious really about your patterns. So rather than, why do I do that thing? I'm such a dick. It's like, okay, I wonder what's going on there. Like there's a part of me that's choosing to do something destructive, but obviously it's trying to keep me safe in some way. What's going on below the surface? So that would be an approach.
Do you think that it's something people can approach by themselves, or do they have to work with somebody? Is it more appropriate when you're starting out to work with somebody or to try and approach that by yourself?
Hey, if you're enjoying this episode and you'd like to show your support, if you like, you can buy us a coffee using the Buy Me a Coffee app or online at buymeacoffee.com/livewildpodcast, or just click the link in our show notes, it will take you there. Alternatively, you can also donate crypto to the show using the BitDonate app or at bitdonate.com and search for Live Wild, or just follow the link in the show notes. Either or both those donations really help us make the best show possible. And as always, you can like, subscribe, and share the show with your mates or on social media. Thank you so much for your help.
Real shadow work is it takes the body into account, and there's more of an embodied approach to it, in which case you probably need other people. More cognitive stuff, which is useful too. Like I think cognitive might be the first step for a lot of people, will be, you know, take out pen and paper, write down the 3 traits you judge the most in people, and then push yourself to figure out, where do I demonstrate these traits, or where might there be some value in these traits? So I might say I judge people who are cocky, I judge people who are self-centered, and I judge people who are assertive. And then I would say, okay, well, being cocky sometimes is useful. Say you're going for a job interview, you don't want to be too humble in that situation. Where did being self-centered be helpful? Well, I'm always people pleasing and that pisses me off. So maybe being self-centered will be useful. So you're starting to kind of soften some of these judgments. So that's more the cognitive approach. If you want to go deep shadow work and really like do the work in that way, facilitation would be good. Like I was at a retreat last week, I mentioned to you, and I mean, that was people stand kind of gestalty stuff. People stand in front of you that represent the people who hurt you in life, and you're physically telling them exactly what you think of them with the exact tone. So that's a different experience altogether.
That's very strong role playing going on there.
Yeah. But acting, I mean, you know, acting better than anyone, and it's amazing. Like the capacity to be able to shift into different energies. You know, it's like, I think a lot of us get shut down. Again, good boy, good girl, appropriate, all this kind of stuff. It's like, okay, I'm going to be in this rigid box and I'm going to hold myself into this one way of being. And so when people get angry, I just, you shouldn't do that. When I'm overjoyed, I feel great. It's like super like monotone, unexpressive. So acting is interesting, I think, in terms of embodying different states.
100%. Like I feel like I've, as an actor throughout the years, given myself permission to express myself in many different ways that I haven't been able to express myself in my everyday life, you know, and that's been a real gift without using it as therapy. Because some people go, oh, you know, it's like a therapy session for actors. And like, I don't view it like that. It's just a form of expression for me. But it's also been part of the catalyst of picking apart why people do the things that they do. You know, when you're trying to dive into a character and figure out why does a character do something, because it's really interesting when you play bad guys, right? We'll give the general term of bad guys. When you pick apart a bad guy, if you're going to play them one dimensionally, fine, they're bad guys, they'll show up with guns and whatever. But if you want to dive a bit deeper into the bad guys don't think they're bad guys. That's the way to play them. They think they're good guys and that they're righteous and justified for doing what they're doing. And that I have always found really fascinating, because that then is a multidimensional character. And then when you apply that to your own life, you're like, oh, okay, that just cracks open a whole other layer of stuff that I wasn't witnessing. You know, It's really, really, really interesting.
I did this meditation recently from Caroline Mace, who's like an amazing teacher. And it's the dungeon. And she basically says, okay, you're, you know, close your eyes, drop into a different state. And you walk down these dingy, horrible, mossy, sludgy steps, and you go deeper and deeper and deeper into this dungeon. It's cold and it's dark and it's miserable. And there's all these cells in the dungeon. And basically all the cells are occupied by the people that you've placed in the dungeon, which are the people you haven't forgiven, the people that you hold resentments for. Some of them are there so long you've forgotten you put them there. But then in the meditation, she says, maybe consider too whose dungeon you're in. So it's the idea that like, you'll be the hero in some people's story, you'll be the villain in other people's story. And it's just part of it. It's all perception and all worldview. And it's a choice to take the key and let people out, you know?
Wow. Yeah. You talked briefly about it being trapped in the body and somatic work. Is that more the direction that you're going in? Somatic work? Like, if you're marrying the two together?
Yeah, trying to.
Recognizing it and then going into the body to try and release?
Yeah, definitely trying to. The last couple of years have been a lot of breath work for probably 8 years now. And then trauma release exercises, which is like, I don't know if you've looked at TRE. It's a really interesting modality. So TRE is nice because I think it's a very accessible modality. And basically the guy, David Berceli, was working in war-torn regions. So he was all over the world, and he'd go to these obviously traumatized areas where there's been war and the whole community, and you can't sit down with 1,000 people and do talk therapy. So he had to come up with an alternative. But he was in the Lebanon once, and he was in a bomb shelter, and every time a bomb would go off in the background, he'd look around the room and the kids would quiver and shake with fear. There was this natural kind of fear response. The adults would hold it together and be kind of rigid and look like they had it together. And he said, wait a second, there's a link here between the body and the stress response. It's kind of like when you're nervous and your hand shakes before you go on stage or whatever. Your body wants to dislodge and let go of that tension that it's holding from fear or anxiety or whatever it might be. But we kind of, again, socialized to death or civilized to death. We want to hold it together and be appropriate. So TRE is a series of exercises that allows your body to, it's called neurogenic tremors. So it's like the deeply held tension in your muscle will release pretty easily when you go through these exercises. So I like that as a modality. I'm also studying a lot of bioenergetics the last couple of years, which has kind of lost its, I know there's bioenergetic therapy. This is slightly different. It was a guy called Alexander Lowen, and they basically looked at, when we experience stress responses, we armor in the body. So the boy that's told don't cry will physically armor and tense around his abdomen, and maybe there's this sticking point then in the diaphragm. So we have these different belts of tension. If I don't want to see what's happening in my reality, I've got the ocular belt of tension. So I'll hold a lot of actual tension in my jaw and my face, or the throat if I'm afraid of communication. It's kind of linked to the chakra system to some degree.
Beautiful, yeah.
So there are physical exercises that you can do to release this tension. It's kind of wild. Like, I'll just break into tears with some of these because it's almost like you're and there's no story attached to it, but just the emotion gets released. It's interesting. So I'm really into the somatic stuff now. It's because there's only so much you can do in the head. It's like, you can tell yourself stories all day about what's good and what's bad and what's right and what's wrong and how you feel, and you can lie to yourself all day, but your body doesn't lie. It's like if someone walks in the room, if someone says, "Oh, I don't have any anger," if you go and like take that person's food or take their lunch or do something that they can say they're not angry, but their body's going to tell you they're angry. There's no lying.
Yeah, I agree. Like I've done talk therapy, but I'm really lucky that the therapist that I'm working with, he very much believes in somatics. So he does a lot of EMDR as well, which is really, really amazing. But separately to that, I've done a lot of somatic work. So there's a wonderful woman in the States and she calls herself the Workout Witch. I don't know if you've come across her work. Yeah. Oh, it's gorgeous. And I've just been, working on her course just at night by myself. And it's remarkable what's coming out. And it's kind of scary the first time it starts to happen. And then it starts. So it's like, you talk about the tremors, it's complete shaking, like complete full body shaking, just through very, very, very gentle, very tiny movements that you can do 5 minutes before bed on your bed. There's nothing stressful. There's nothing strenuous about it. But the emotional release, and for me, then, I get the emotional release and then the story or the thought process will come behind it. But it just physically works its way through the body. And there's I could be lying there shaking for a good 5 to 10 minutes. And sometimes I go, oh my God, is this ever going to end? Yeah. But it's really remarkable. It's like then a breath of fresh air, you've left it go. And I think once you start to open, in my experience anyway, when I've started to open that well of trauma stored in the body, there's the saying that, your issues are in your tissues. Like when you start to open that well of trauma, it then comes very fast. So now I find I could be anywhere and the shaking could start, but I'm not afraid of it anymore. I just go, okay, I'm going to go shake there for a while and it will release and it'll just go. And the body's amazing. It's so wise. It just knows, and it knows when to hang on as well until you're ready to release, I think.
Yeah, that's mirrored in so Peter Levine's work is incredible. He's the guy behind somatic experiencing, and like that's phenomenal. But he'll talk about animals in the wild and like that. When an animal is under threat, the body will tense, the heart rate gets fast, the breath gets shallow, the blood thickens, and they have the fight or flight response. If they collapse or say, I don't know, fight or flight response, so they've got the surge of energy to get them to safety. If they get surrounded and they're under massive threat where they're not going to get away, they'll play dead. So that's their defense strategy. And when they come out of that freeze response, the first thing they do is the first thing they do is diaphragmatic breath. So that creates a sense of safety. The next thing they do is they orientate. So they look around their space to make sure they're safe and comfortable. And assuming all the threats have gone, the body will tremor and shake. And what it's doing is, if you think about all the times in your life when you have these little stresses, where maybe your boss shouts at you or your partner gives you a funny look, and your body's responding all the time with kind of that energy. And so in theory, a healthy system is going to have that surge of energy, and then you're going to dislodge the energy in some way and use it so that you come back into homeostasis, you come back into balance. But for a lot of us, we have that surge of energy and there's nowhere for it to go because, again, we're appropriate and we hold it together. And so it just sits there in the system. And then I'm in a wound up system. It's a bit like a soldier coming back from 6 months of war.
Yeah.
The body's been in hypervigilance and now they go and they sit with their family, and their family are safe in theory, but it doesn't feel safe because their system is just perceiving threats everywhere because it's never come to completion. So somatic work is about bringing some of those those interrupted cycles to completion. So get a pillow and smash the pillow and tell your dad how angry you are at him, or get a punch bag and tell your partner how hurt you are about what they did, or whatever it is, and actually express through the body. And it can feel very vulnerable. Sometimes tears come with that because anger might be a gateway to our sadness. It might be our way of protecting ourselves from our sadness, but Yeah, if to heal, you've got to feel, as they say.
Yeah. Even that, you're rolling your eyes at that. There's still that bit of like
Yeah, I know that.
resistance.
No, I think it's I spent so much time in this. It's been the nature of anything I've ever done is like is an obsession around like fitness, and then like that the cliche is I've heard them a million times, then I forget that someone who's new to it probably hasn't heard it, you know. So
Yeah.
I'm like I feel like I'm regurgitating, but no.
Yeah, I know you do men's work as well, men's circles, which is wonderful, so wonderful and so needed. What's the reoccurring theme or pattern that you're seeing with men that are showing up in those circles?
I think it's the challenge of having range. So what I mean by that is there's a certain way of being for men that they're comfortable in, and anything outside of that way of being is challenging. So they're comfortable having it together. They're comfortable being orderly. They're comfortable being productive. They're comfortable being the provider. But then beyond that, it can be scary. So one of the ways I work is with the archetypes. So there's many archetypes, but for men, the four that we focus on are the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. And the idea is that each of them are a different energy that we all have. So for men, the king represents the leader in your life. So do I have a sense of leadership, a sense of clarity, a sense of joy for the life that I'm living that's unique to me? So some men don't have that king online. It's like the king has left the throne and they're very defeated in life. They feel a bit empty or lost. For other men, the king completely takes over and they become tyrants like Trump or someone like that who just has no care for other people. It's just like my way or the highway. So that's the king energy. And then the warrior energy is about going and getting things done. So men will tend to be quite strong in the warrior. They can go and get things done. So it's a state of doing, action, direction. The lover energy can be a challenge for men, and that's about being present to ourselves, to our loved ones, to nature, to our feelings. So that's lover energy. And then the magician energy is about thinking and strategizing and planning. So I can work with a man and within a few minutes have a sense of what's out of balance. So we might say someone who's very intellectual, maybe is a very overactive magician, but then their lover is shut down and there's a lack of feeling. Someone who's very much in their warrior and is always doing, again, will tend to be disconnected from their feeling because they're so driven. Someone who lacks a king and a vision for their life can be chaotic because those other energies just kind of take over. So the lover becomes an addict that just wants to feel all the time. The warrior becomes a relentless, like just do things for the sake of doing things. So I think the challenge I see is men trying to balance those energies or understand those energies within themselves. We were trained that you're not supposed to feel. Another challenge I think a lot of men have a story that nothing I ever do will be enough.
Yeah.
That's the wound. That's the big wound is nothing I do will be, and I do all these things and it goes unappreciated. I think men don't feel seen.
That's really interesting. In a men's circle, what does it look like physically when you're going into a men's circle? Like, how does it operate for those that are curious out there that are thinking, is this for me? But I don't know if is it too out there for me?
Yeah. Well, an interesting piece of feedback that often comes through is guys will often say, they'll message and they'll say, I'm not really a man's man. And I'm like, neither am I. So like, I think you'll be okay. You know, people have a perception, I need to love football and pints and whatever. But it happened by accident. I was doing personal development workshops for years and it was all women coming to the sessions because I come from fitness and all my clients were female. Most of my clients were female. So it was mostly female. And then a couple of guys started showing up. And over the years, the demographic just shifted to where it was 50-50. So that's what prompted the men's circle. What it looks like, there's different. I mean, I do full day. Well, I've done full day workshops with there's 100 guys and that's kind of a different dynamic. But for a smaller men's circle, it might be 10 to 15 guys, ranging from early 20s to early 70s. Of course, others are welcome too, but that's kind of been the demographic that's been there. Usually in terms of structure, I'll work with those energies that I mentioned. So I start with the lover round. So lover round is about just sharing how you feel. So each person will have a couple of minutes to share how they feel. For guys that have never done it before, that'll be challenging. So they'll probably talk more about what they think. So I think this and I think this and I think this as opposed to what I feel because that's more comfortable. Usually I'll do some communication. It's really simple stuff, at least the way I structure it. I'll get guys to partner off and to share for 3 minutes, you know, a challenge they're currently facing and something they're most excited about at the moment. And they just get a couple of minutes each. And we might do some process work. If someone's going through something difficult, I might do some work with him. And again, gestalty, I might get, different men to represent different characters in that man's life, and he can go to each of the men and kind of say what he needs to say. So maybe he's having problems with his wife, and might get one of the men to represent his wife, and he'll say the words that his wife might say, and then the guy can respond. So he's getting the embodied sense of how it is to actually hold a boundary or to express himself authentically, and he's actually feeling it and getting the practice of that. But ultimately, the session is about giving them. I would love to think guys leave the session and say, "Oh, Pat's a genius! Like he's really, really good at this stuff." But what guys leave with is they say, "It's nice to know I'm not the only one who struggles, and it's nice to connect with other guys that are struggling." So that's typically the feedback. It's just a space where guys can share what's going on for them.
That's amazing, and I think traditionally that used to be the pub or the sports ground or any of those places where, that culture is shifting now.
Yeah, all people need is and I'm the same, like with certain things in my life. I just need someone to show me the structure as to how to do it, so that I can feel safe to kind of drop in. If there's no structure, that's the challenge. That's one of the masculine gifts, is providing structure. If there's no structure, the thing falls apart, because like sometimes when I run groups, the guys will say, "Oh, we're just going to keep this going on our own." On a weekly basis. If there's no structure, it just turns into a chit chat and pub talk and all that kind of stuff. So you need someone to hold the structure. And that allows people to fall apart if they need to fall apart, and then be put back together,
I agree. I see it all the time, even with my own kids. You provide a safe container for them and they can do whatever they want inside that container. I see it all the time on set with actors. You provide a safe space for them to play, and they'll give you absolute gold. But if the structure or this container or the set isn't safe, then it's just going to be a mess. Which I've been in that one too.
I get this slightly wrong, but I heard this study or this story that it was like a playground, like massive, big open playground. And there was some swings and stuff in the middle, and the kids would stay very close to the swings because they were scared, because they didn't know how far out this area went, just like acres and acres of land or whatever. And then after a while, they put in a fence that was pretty wide around the thing, and now the kids could see the fence. So there was a sense of containment, and suddenly they started venturing out. It was like they felt safe because they knew there was boundaries. And that comes back to our communication piece in terms of if I'm not authentic and I'm the nice guy and I always tell you what you want to hear, you're not going to feel safe with me, because there's no sense of boundary. You don't know where I end, because I just put up with everything, and you can intrude my space, whereas if we have a difficult conversation, I said that wasn't okay with me, in theory it should create more safety, because now you know that I'm going to say what I need to say, and that you can say what you need to say. So
it's so interesting as well. I think even for male to female, if you have that situation where it's like there's a nice guy playing a role within it, and the female doesn't feel safe, she will test him and test the boundaries to feel safe until she finds the edges, and that's where a massive amount of conflict will come in, because she needs to feel safe to create what she needs to create in there, because it's a very deep pool that she can create. I always say, if you give a woman ingredients, she'll make you a meal. You give her a house, she'll make you a home. You give her seeds, she'll make her a family. So her capacity to create is kind of based on what you can give her, but there's boundaries of safeness within that as well.
One of my teachers, probably a bit controversial, but one of my teachers says, one of his teachers, so John Wineland, I studied with John a couple of years ago, and John does amazing work around polarity and all this kind of stuff. And he studied with David Data, Data's work. Yeah, I've
read his books.
So Data had a thing where he said that a woman will push, and this will piss some people off probably, but I think it's true. He said a woman will push and push and push. She'll find the one thing that is where you collapse, and she'll push and she'll push and she'll push and she'll push until you collapse. And your job is to stay open. In other words, don't close your heart to what's being pushed. I said, she's not being an asshole. She's trying to ensure that she's safe, because if you're going to collapse every time that she tests your integrity, you're not a safe man. So I thought that was like a really useful thing. And someone said, what happens when you like get past that thing and you don't do it anymore? She said, oh, she'll find something else. But I think so it could be, if my pattern is to get stressed and numb out and push everyone away, she'll try and make me do that, because she wants to test, is this a man that can actually show up, or is he going to just collapse every time? And
where the limits are.
Yeah, I can see her either as being out to get me and nothing ever being enough, or I can see her as like calling me forward, and her seeing me as like more than I see myself. Like, I don't think I'm worthy of this, but she sees me as worthy, so she's pushing me like a good coach almost would coach me and push me.
I think that's so interesting, because I think, yes, David Daya's work and that kind of, body of work can be so polarizing. But there's so much gold in it if we can drop or shift perceptions around it. Like you said, she can either be the antagonist or the nag, the classic nagging wife or whatever it might be, however you may choose to perceive it. Or it's like, where is she seeing my boundaries? And how does that redefine me? And how can I step into that man that she sees? You know,
That's a really powerful, it's just on that, I suppose, masculine, feminine dynamic. And again, I know it's triggering for people and the language around it can be triggering for people, but I found a really useful exercise of, call it like a masculine or feminine reconciliation, where you would look back on all your previous relationships and say, for the masculine, he might say, what are the ways that you withheld your masculine gifts? So masculine gifts will again be things like structure, direction, safety, and so you would look at it, all the ways that you dropped the ball on those things in previous relationships. So I didn't speak my truth. I didn't provide direction. I didn't lead. I didn't plan ahead, all these kind. And then you would ask, where are the ways, or what are the ways that I stopped her from fully expressing her feminine gifts? So it could be she wanted to go out dancing and I just wouldn't let myself do that with her. So she didn't get to be in her feminine in that way. And then there's other questions around like, where did you not live fully and then blame your partner for that? Yeah. And then the final bit of that exercise is quite powerful, is you think about what would the impact have been for them. So you might say, well, the impact for you when I didn't lead will have been that you didn't feel safe and you didn't feel like you could trust me. The impact for you when I pushed your love away will have been that you felt rejected. And it's a really powerful exercise just again, see our shadow or our patterns in relationship.
I could talk to you all day about this stuff.
Likewise.
Okay, I'm conscious of time, and so I'm going to ask you a final question, then we'll go on to the Live Wild quickfire round. Okay, so what has been your best self-regulating tool so far that you feel will benefit others?
I'm going to say shaking, actually, just like standing up and shaking. Obviously, I've done years of breath work and that's useful, but sometimes breath work requires sitting down for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. Shaking is literally just like, the way I think about the stress response is the body will typically tense, the breath tends to shorten, and oftentimes we lose our voice. That's what happens in trauma. We lose our voice, we lose our movement, we lose our breath. And so with shaking, you would literally just shake through the body. It's kind of like a Qigong practice. You think about like shaking up any stagnant energy. But the two things you can bring into it, obviously, you've got your shaking, which is the movement. You can bring in your breaths, so nice deep breaths as you do it. And the third thing, you can bring in a bit of sound. So, and those three things. So 2-3 minutes of shaking tends to, it was funny, during one of the lockdowns, I did 6 months of daily meditation and journaling with a group. It was supposed to be a month and we just kept going. So like 100 people journaling every morning. And one day I said, I'm going to come on and shake tomorrow if anyone wants to show up 10 minutes early. I thought nobody would show up. Everyone showed up and they loved it. They were like, this is better than the journaling. So it's really simple. Just put on some drumming music and let your body move.
Nice. Okay. Pat Divilly, are you ready for the Live Wild quickfire round?
Yes, I'm not going to be appropriate or a good boy.
Don't. We don't want that. We don't want that. Okay. Do you believe in magic?
Yes.
Ooh. Okay. Good. Do you feel like, I know it's a quick fire round, so I'm contradicting myself, but do you feel like expressing that further or not? We don't have to, but you can stay mysterious if you want.
I'm not mysterious. One thing I'll say is I have an elder teacher years ago, and I had some wild synchronicities happening in my life that were like magic. And I told him, and he said, you need to keep telling people this, because he said, when synchronicities happen or magic happens, oftentimes we just write it off as, oh, that was interesting. He said, if you keep telling people and you keep sharing it, you become more aware of it and you start to see more magic in your life. And I think that's true.
Oh my God, 100%. 100%. Even the word synchronicity recently came up for me again, a word that I'm familiar with and I know, obviously, but the word itself came to me like 4 times in the one day through various different incidences. And I went, okay, maybe I've lost a spark of magic. And I was driving home from Kerry and I was like, okay, magic. Well, I know you're around, so just show up if you're around then. And as I said it, I drove past a house and I looked at the name of the house and it was Drecht. Magic.
Oh, wow, nice.
I was like, okay, we're back.
Yeah, ask and it's given.
Yeah, I love it. What's your favorite healing modality and why? We kind of just touched on that briefly, actually, which was your shaking, but
Yeah, for longer practice, I would say breath work because, you know, you can get plant medicine results with just your breath. And it's a very kind of intimate way of connecting in with all the different parts of you. So sometimes I tap into my inner warrior. Sometimes I tap into my inner feminine. You know, I think it's a real intimate way of being with yourself.
What do you stand for, Pat Divilly?
Truth and authenticity.
Nice. If you were to distill yourself down to an essence, what would your essence be?
Authenticity.
Nice.
Is that allowed?
Yeah, anything's allowed here. What's the wildest thing you've ever done?
Oh, Jesus. This is where I struggle with the quick fire. Do you want to give me a bit more context or a nudge in some direction, or?
I can give you examples of what other people have said that might spark something.
Sure.
And they really range. They really range. Actually, a common theme in season 2 was a couple of people said the wildest thing they've ever done is actually settle down and have a family.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, thought that was interesting.
When I was 18, I went to America for 6 months to cage fight, and I fought down in Mexico. So that was like pretty wild at the time.
It is. That really is.
Yeah, cage fighting wasn't really a thing here, and I just moved to San Diego, and I thought I'm going to give this a go. And I had some fights down in Tijuana and bet on myself to win because you didn't get paid. That was probably wild at that age.
Did you win?
Sometimes.
Wow, that is wild.
Yeah,
that's one for the memoir.
Yeah, there's lots for the memoir. Yeah, I won't share it. Yeah, that'll do.
Okay. Last question. What's the one thing you do every day that helps you live wild and free?
I don't journal every day, but I speak to myself every day. I tune into my different parts every day. I listen to something deeper than myself every day. So I think it's that. I think I don't feel confined to a box. Like I don't wake up thinking I'm Pat and I'm a writer and a jiu-jitsu guy. That's part of who I am, but I allow space for the bigger part of possibility. I think that's probably the thing that keeps me open to. I'm not afraid to be a beginner. I'm not afraid to step into things I don't know. I'm not afraid to show up differently. I'm not afraid to speak my truth. I'm sometimes afraid to be messy, but I do it anyway. So I think it's allowing space for God, if you like, I'm going to call it God, but a voice to guide me. I was in this meditation recently and this mantra came in and it's like, God's got a plan. And I just kept going, God's got a plan, God's got a plan, God's got a plan. And it gives me relief because so often my ego wants things to work out in a certain way and I'm not where I should be by this age and all this kind of stuff. But then it's like, God's got a plan and she's never failed me up to this point. So it's, I think it's that, making space for God in some way.
That's interesting. I was going to finish up the interview, but I want to talk to you about that now. Just real quickly, like, I suppose, were you raised Catholic? I was raised Catholic and there was, there was always, I think there's a distinct difference in my mind between religion and God, I don't know where I'm going with that, but
I was an altar boy and all that kind of stuff. I don't consider myself religious, like in that traditional sense. I think it's a shame. Like when I go to funerals or weddings, which is a rare time that I go to mass or church, I do feel like, oh wow, like what a unique opportunity this is to have hundreds of people from the community in one space. What you could do with this, you could get great speakers in, you could have actually great lessons. It just feels a bit detached that like priests don't get to live a normal life. Like I've worked with priests who will tell me that it's hard for them to connect to emotion because they have to be the one that has it all together. And so they struggle to, but yeah, I saw something, what was it, like religion is like a weekend hobby, whereas spirituality is a lifelong way of being, a life. Yeah. And religion kind of almost is the gatekeeper to spirituality. It's like trying to get in the way. Religion almost tries to get in the way between me and God. Whereas spirituality is my direct connection to God, I think.
That's so interesting because I always feel like, you can be religious and not spiritual, but you can be religious, but not spiritual. But you don't need religion for spirituality.
Yeah. I think there's space for both. I think for a spiritual way of living is to take the lessons from everything that's happening and to be open to everything and to be curious about everything. So could definitely be inspired by a religious text if I understood what was going on. But
Definitely. I've got, actually, the Bible is sitting right there, because sometimes I find myself quoting from the Bible. I'm not religious, but I find myself kind of quoting from the Bible. I go, that's really interesting. That's full of wisdom. Let's explore that further. Equally, there's a bunch of other texts as well there.
There's one quote in the Bible. I think it's, I probably get it wrong, but I think it's like an amazing thing to live by. It's something like, if you bring forth what is within you, it will save you. But if you don't bring forth what is within you, it'll destroy you. And what I take from that is, like, we've all been given gifts and opportunities. And if you sit on them and don't do anything with them, it's going to eat you up alive. And you'll be the old man or the old woman in the pub saying what you could have been. But if you go and you express your gifts, then God gives you more. Yeah, I like that one.
That's a place to finish, I believe.
Yeah, a wide-ranging conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been just so informative and so lovely and so casual. And I feel very comfortable in your presence, even though we're, a distance apart. So thank you. And I would hope that you would come back and do maybe another season. We continue and dive deeper into different conversations.
I'd love to. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for being here. We hope you enjoyed listening as much as we enjoyed making these episodes. Thank you, as always, to our amazing guests. A special thank you to Aoife McNamara, my co-producer extraordinaire from Imagine Media. Please like, share, subscribe and rate us. It all really helps. And remember, this content is for education and entertainment purposes. In short, it's not gospel. I always say, take what resonates with you and leave the rest. Always question everything and do your own research.